U.S. President Donald Trump calls critical minerals a key priority as he hosted the leaders of 5 Central Asian nations at the White House.
The European Commission has adopted stricter visa rules for Russians wishing to enter the Schengen area.
The United Nations approves a U.S.-backed effort to lift sanctions on Syria's president and members of his government ahead of a historic visit to the White House. U.S. President Donald Trump hailed leaders of 5 Central Asian countries after a White House meeting on Thursday as he intensifies his hunt for rare earth metals needed for high-tech devices including smartphones, electric vehicles and fighter jets. At a working dinner with officials from 5 Central Asian countries, Trump stressed the importance of critical minerals to Washington.
One of the key items on our agenda is critical minerals. In recent weeks, my administration has strengthened American economic security by forging agreements with allies and friends across the world to broaden our critical mineral supply chains. We had a great relationship and a great meeting with President Xi of China.
China expanded export restrictions over vital rare earth metals before announcing after Trump-Xi talks in South Korea that Beijing will delay its new restrictions by 1 year. Analysts believe Washington is now seeking new ways to circumvent Beijing in the critical minerals market, which controls roughly 90% of global rare earth processing.
U.S. President Donald Trump hosted the presidents of 5 Central Asian countries in the White House on Thursday as he intensifies efforts to secure rare earth minerals critical for the production of high-tech, including electric cars and fighter jets. In a meeting with the leaders of Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Turkmenistan, all nations rich in rare earth metals, Trump criticized previous administrations for having neglected what he called an important region.
No doubt that we have. These nations were once home to the ancient Silk Road connecting east and west. Great history, tremendous, beautiful history. Today, their location in the heart of Eurasia gives them incredible importance and unbelievable potential. Sadly, previous American presidents neglected this region completely. It's an unbelievable region, and by the way, it happens to be an extremely wealthy region, too. But we are fixing that mistake, and I'm committed to making America's partnership with each of these countries stronger than ever before.
Uzbekistan's President Shavkat Mirziyoyev met with Donald Trump at the White House and had talks about strengthening Uzbek-American strategic partnership, enhancing political dialogue and expanding trade, economic investment and cultural humanitarian cooperation. And then they participated in the summit of Central Asia and United States leaders in the C5+1 format, which over the past 10 years since its establishment has become an effective mechanism for developing regional trade, transport and energy connections. This is the second time the summit is taking place. At this time, President Mirziyoyev proposed about 10 initiatives, such as establishing a permanent secretariat to ensure continuous coordination and communication among member countries, creating a coordinating council on investment and trade to strengthen economic ties and facilitate regional business cooperation, launching the Central Asian Investment Partnership Fund to attract and manage joint investment in key regional projects, developing major transport, communication and energy projects to connect Central Asia with the South Caucasus and Europe. At the conclusion of the negotiations, President of Uzbekistan proposed to hold the next summit in the city of Samarkand and invited Donald Trump to pay an official visit to Uzbekistan.
Kazakhstan has officially pledged to sign the Abraham Accords, a series of agreements first introduced in 2020 to normalize diplomatic relations between Israel and Arab nations. During the C5+1 summit in Washington, Donald Trump made an unprecedented gesture, inviting President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev to join a phone call with Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to solidify Kazakhstan's intent to join the accords. The C5+1 summit also yielded over $17 billion in new agreements between Kazakhstan and the U.S. companies spanning mineral resources, digital technologies. The U.S. remains Kazakhstan's largest investor with more than $100 billion in cumulative investments, about 80% of all foreign investment in Central Asia. Bilateral trade has nearly doubled to $5 billion, with more than 600 American companies now in operation in Kazakhstan.
The European Commission has adopted stricter visa rules for Russians wishing to enter the Schengen area. Russian applicants can no longer apply for multiple entry, but can still be issued with single-entry visas.
The new rules severely restrict the issuance of multiple entry visa to Russian applicants. That being said, certain limited exceptions remain. These include, for example, close family members of Russian citizens residing in the EU and family members of EU citizens. They can have multiple entry visas valid for up to 1 year. Transport workers can have still be issued such visa for up to 9 months.
There are exceptions. For example, a country can issue multiple entry visas to dissidents, independent journalists and human rights defenders. The EU fully suspended the EU's visa facilitation agreement with Russia in 2022, which made short-stay visa applications more expensive and more difficult for Russians. Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia went a step further, restricting entry to their countries for Russian citizens. In 2024, more than 600,000 applications for short-stay visas were issued to Russians for the EU and Schengen-associated countries, with a refusal rate of 7.5%.
Poland experiences incidents that regularly spark discussions about the country's security. Research centers analyzed Poles' declared behaviors in the event of armed conflict. According to an Ibris poll, half of citizens would report to defend the country. Meanwhile, Pollster indicates that 26% of Poles declare readiness to support the military, while 57% have no intention of getting involved.
Chociaż ten procent wydaje się niewielki, prawda, tam tylko około 1/4 ludzi gotowych do obrony kraju, no to jednak z tej 1/4 da się sformować całkiem porządną armię. Kolejną sprawą jest trochę brak zaufania do armii, ponieważ tylko połowa Polaków mniej więcej stwierdza, że nasza armia byłaby w stanie obronić ten kraj. Jeśli idę do wojska, to chciałbym być pewien, że zostanę dobrze przeszkolony i będę dobrze dowodzony. Jeżeli nie mam takiej pewności, no to cóż, no morale trochę spada w tym momencie.
The poll shows that young people are the least inclined to fight for their country. Euronews decided to ask them about it in person.
Myślę, że zostałbym w kraju. Na tyle bardzo lubię Polskę i ostatnio coraz bardziej ją lubię, że myślę, że zostałbym tutaj i nie wiem, w jakiej formie bym jej bronił, ale na pewno bym tu został.
Myślę, że forma wojny jest o tyle nieznana, że nie jestem w stanie jeszcze podjąć decyzji, natomiast sam się zastanawiam, czy mam jeszcze taką odwagę, jaką mieli nasi dziadkowie, pradziadkowie kiedyś.
Jeżeli mamy nawiązywać do naszego powstania warszawskiego albo takich rzeczy, no to oczywiście. Ale jeżeli teraz to by były jakieś polityczne zagrania, no to chyba musiałabym się naprawdę długo zastanawiać.
Researchers also asked respondents about their political views. In a situation of war, voters of the Law and Justice Party and the Civic Coalition are most likely to fight. Thousands of demonstrators gathered in Riga's Dome Square on Thursday evening to protest Latvia's possible withdrawal from the Istanbul Convention. It's the second protest in just over a week, with 5,000 people gathering in front of Parliament last Wednesday. It follows a vote passed by Latvia's parliament last week to leave the international treaty, which is aimed at supporting women who are victims of violence. The decision sparked outrage from civil society organizations who saw it as backtracking on fundamental rights. Earlier this week, Latvia's president sent the law back to Parliament for review, which then decided to postpone the final decision until November next year, when a new parliament will have taken office. Critics say the delay does not resolve the issue, and the protest's organizers argued the need for society to continue to stand up against politicians. The EU as a whole acceded to the Istanbul Convention in 2023, making it a legally binding agreement for the 27 member states in areas falling under the EU's competence.
The United Nations Security Council voted Thursday to lift a series of sanctions on Syrian President Ahmad al-Shara and members of his government, days before he is set to arrive in the U.S. for a historic visit to the White House. The U.S. resolution to drop UN sanctions tied to al-Shara and Syria's interior minister, stemming from ties to al-Qaeda, was adopted with 14 members in support. China abstained from the vote. Al-Shara, who first met with US President Donald Trump in Riyadh this summer, was the head of al-Qaeda-linked Islamist militia that led rebels to overthrow Bashar al-Assad in December. US officials pushed to pass the resolution before Monday, when Trump is expected to host al-Shara in the first visit by Syrian president to Washington. In October, al-Shara held talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow.
At least 5 people were killed as Typhoon Kalmegi made landfall in Vietnam on Thursday. The storm, Asia's strongest of the year, barreled through the central provinces of the country, bringing with it fierce winds and torrential rains. Vast damage was recorded across the affected areas as Kalmegi pummeled the Southeast Asian nation with wind speeds exceeding 149 kilometers an hour. 52 houses were reported to have collapsed, and more than 2,600 others sustained damage to varying degrees. Local Vietnamese media say the roofs were blown off of 2,400 residential properties. More than 535,000 people were evacuated due to the threat of floods and landslides. It comes just days after the typhoon devastated the archipelagic nation of more than 7,600 islands, the Philippines. Kalmegi killed close to 190 people as it made landfall there earlier in the week, and 135 people were reported missing. The storm is now headed west to Cambodia and Laos, where it's expected to make landfall on Friday. It's been downgraded to a tropical depression, carrying winds of 85 kilometers an hour.